At the crossroads of their lives. Preamble. At the crossroads of their lives is the story of two lives that evolved over time, each in their respective world, before their path crosses. Destiny will bring together two beings with a particular existence, who will discover a new meaning to their life, during their union. We follow our path alone during a part of our lives, until the day when our roads will cross. Sometimes life does not take shape as expected. It holds surprises, good or bad depending on how we perceive them. Let's be careful what we can call bad surprises, because they can lead us on a wonderful road that we could never have imagined. At the edge of the chasm. While Rosalind's life was on the brink and she had run out of hope, a glimmer had appeared. We are in 1916, at the dawn of his 30s. For a year, she returned to live under the roof of her parents, after the early death of her husband. Always, even before the death of the one with whom she shared her life, she was always sad and had no purpose in life. She saw beautiful things around her, but she could not appreciate them. She would have had no other wishes than to be happy, but she could not. She had never tasted the happiness of living. She was tired of life, but she still hoped that one day she would see the light at the end of the tunnel. Rosalind had received a diary from her mother's present. Here is an overview of what she had written on it. She had this beautiful book from her mother. He was so beautiful that she did not even dare to write what she really wanted. An image came back to him often. Especially when she was swimming. She saw herself swimming, ever further, to the infinite. She saw the sun's rays twinkling on the water. There, suddenly, exhausted, she sank. What appeasement in a magical setting! To be honest, she was downright unhappy. She was trying to pretend it was all right, because everyone was fed up with her bad mood. It was true that sometimes she had fun, but it was ephemeral. His life was a total failure. She was barely 30 years old and her husband was gone. She felt lonely, so lonely. She felt like nobody loved her. She had the belief that she was going to leave this earth without having accomplished anything, achieved nothing, and without love. She wondered why everything was so difficult. Nothing good happened to him. She was desperate. Since she was born, she considered that nothing was good for her. She did not remember breaking a mirror. She felt totally abandoned by those around her. If no one loved her, she might have to leave and never come back. Make a living elsewhere or maybe finish it off. His life did not make sense. Day after day, it was always the same thing. There was no hope that it would improve. She lived a great sadness. Nobody understood anything and did not want to hear it. Realize things, it was a vain illusion in her life, because she had accomplished nothing. For a kiss. After the sudden death of her husband, having nowhere to go, his parents had welcomed him home. The tension began to rise between her parents and her. Cohabitation with them was not going at all. She still had no one in her life and she missed him a lot. She hoped to share her life with someone she would have a complicity with. Someone with whom she could share everything. But that day did not seem to be coming to fruition. Loneliness was very difficult to live. For her time, she was a marginal girl. She had been married for about 10 years before becoming a widow at the dawn of her 30s, without, however, having founded her own family. She was a housewife, her husband providing for their needs. His father owned a small hotel in town, which was also used as a family residence. Since she was a widow, she had become accustomed to consulting a fortune teller. Strangely, everything she said happened every day in a rather disturbing precision. On the other hand, she had begun to study tarot. One day in her cards it was written that she had to be wary of a close person. She had also consulted the seer who had told her the same thing. She had concluded that she must be wary of her parents. His tarot draws also predicted what an influential man would encounter in his life in the near future. It might be the man of his life. Actually, some time later, came to the hotel that his father was holding, a traveler. His name was Albert. Rosalind met by chance while she was working at the hotel. Albert had made a reservation for one night and was soon courting Rosalind. Albert was a man with a troubled and difficult past, full of misery. Beneath the hidden face of appearances was a man with a lively and tumultuous life. What was wonderful was that despite the hardships of his life, he had not let himself be imposed and became an accomplished man. If you asked him if he would have changed anything in the course of his life, he would have answered you with no hesitation. He was proud of the path he had traveled. The difficulties he had had to go through had forged him strength to live. He was a man who knew how to take life philosophically. Of course he will not only encounter obstacles in his path. He had been enjoying every moment of pleasure that life had offered him. At the age of 40, with all the wisdom he had acquired during his life, he continued to enjoy all the abundance of days available to him. Albert had not had an easy life. He had always had to rely on himself to survive. Without the support of anyone, he had made his way into life, and it must be said, he had succeeded. He had to forge his philosophy of life without any model. He was inspired by a feeling that boiled down to, enjoy life. He did not spoil his existence with futile problems. He did not bury his feet in the flowers of the carpet. He always said, there are no problems, only solutions. In the past, some people had abused his trust. What was remarkable was that he always knew how to trust. The company of women had never failed him. He was a charming man who had style and who knew how to charm women. His personality knew how to please women, and it must be said that he knew how to approach them. Conquest after conquest, he knew how to seduce them all. Albert had been on the run for a number of years, he had no fixed address. However, his attraction to Rosalind had led him to stay close to her. He had rented a room at the hotel of Rosalind's father, for an indefinite period. Albert was far from leaving Rosalind indifferent. She liked him a lot and she was looking for his company. For her, it represented the pleasure of biting into life and happiness. During these new meetings, she learned to know Albert better and to discover him. He often came to visit him, and that's how their love affair began. Rosalind and Albert had had time alone and had begun to court each other. In fact, they were discussing and getting to know each other better. Albert confessed to him that he had wanted to kiss him at the first moment when he had put his eyes on her. He had not done anything. Mutual attraction was already beginning to be felt. One day, he had made her hear a song that made her think of him. He had asked her to memorize it so they could sing it together. 2 days later, it was done. Together they were singing this song. She sang it thinking about him. This music aroused more his desire for Albert. She was getting close to him. In her dreams she dreamed of her suitor. She imagined herself making a living with him. Desire settled between them, but they made no gesture to each other too demonstrative. She just hoped for a gesture from him, and he too wanted to, but he did not know what to do. Albert, who used to woo women only for feverish moments, had a sudden urge to take his time. With Rosalind it was different. For the first time in his life, he realized that maybe he could make a living with a woman. One that he would like and cherish for eternity. Albert brought him presents and good wine. One day he had arrived with a bottle of brandy of a venerable age. It was pure delight. She liked all the little attentions he had for her. She was not indifferent. On a few occasions, he gave her massages. He touched it without going too far. Sometimes he let his hands slide near her breasts. They appreciated these privileged moments. A few times he had taken her against him to make her dance. She was a little uncomfortable, but she liked the attention he gave her. She liked having a contact with him. He approached her, touched her, and she appreciated the intimate contact they shared together. On a popular day, he stormed the dance floor. Albert danced with a particular style, which held the attention and the glances. She liked to see him dance. Then he had him dancing against him. She kept an unforgettable memory. Every night she prayed for something meaningful to change her life. It was this first kiss. It was the best thing life could offer him as a gift. Shortly before that famous kiss, she had dreamed of him. They kissed languidly in a swamp in the middle of the night. She had felt that kiss as if it had been real. He then approached her, and as if a force lifted him, he kissed him. It was sweet and exciting. She would have liked this kiss to never end. It was the beginning of a great love. They had intertwined, not really knowing what they were doing. Her kisses carried her to another world. She was so good in her arms that she did not want them left. But not being able to stay with him at that moment, she left him and decided to take a walk. It was a spring day and it was raining. She walked, wondering if he would follow in her footsteps and join her. It was not the case. The day passed and she heard no news of him. In the heart of a troubling world. It was now almost a year since Rosalind and Albert were courting each other. Romantic dinners at evenings by the river. Everything was going well in the best of all worlds. Albert had always had a gift to surprise Rosalind. He often arrived with special attention for her. Without a particular occasion, he had prepared a delicious supper for him. There were roses and on a card that accompanied the flowers was written, "I love you." It was very romantic, but even more enjoyable, he had taken him to spend the rest of the evening by the river. Side by side, sitting on a log near the water, they had savored the moment. The sun was setting in the distance, the water was calm and the atmosphere was magical. It was an opportunity for them to discuss how much they liked doing it. He had then turned to her and in a surge of love, he had asked for her in marriage. He realized one of his dearest dreams, to unite his life to the man she loved. They were engaged in the utmost discretion, for their greater happiness. Wanting to know more about their future, she decided to make a tarot draw. She was shocked. All the worst cards in the tarot deck were out. She was scared, wondering what was waiting for them. Everything on his cards seemed to be happening. Panic started to win her. She remembered the tarot draws, other information that the psychic had told her. His ideas began to go faster and faster. She feared for their lives. Indeed, a tragedy came to shake them. It was the First World War and conscription was declared. Albert had been invited to enlist in the army to fulfill his obligations. Having no choice, he left his fiancée to join the army. Both were heartbroken and could hardly imagine their future far from each other. Albert, who had lived without attachment all his life and had just met his soulmate, was to leave her suddenly. Rosalind, on the other hand, found herself again in mourning. She was going to lose the chosen one of her heart, maybe forever. She was starting to panic. His thoughts were starting to go at a crazy pace. Albert's sudden departure had plunged him into the center of a sad and painful world. Even more painful than the state of mind in which she had always lived. Completely disconnected from the real world, she sank into the abyss. All his prospects were troubled. She had a strange way of approaching situations and she saw coincidences everywhere, from which she was trying to find meaning. She seemed to denote symbols inviting her to join her deceased husband in another world. She had often thought of death, imagining herself swimming infinitely in the waters, or glittering the sun until she sank. Still staying with her parents, they were aware of Rosalind's strange behavior. She was suspicious, sad, and barely ate. His health worried them enormously, they had convinced him to accompany them for a visit to the doctor. At that moment she feared for Albert's life, but for his own too. She thought she was going to die every night. Convinced that she would be killed at the hospital where she had been interned, she had burst into tears and had a panic attack. Her parents could not stay with her, she thought she would never see them again. She thought she had lost Albert forever. Anguish invades him, the fear of dying and never seeing the man of his life again. His bed was placed against a window. She was trying to find hope symbols by looking outside, but nothing. It was time to go to bed. Before sleep, she had written a note of love to her lover, whom she had kept in her hands all night in case she did not wake up the next morning. For fear of falling into sleep without ever seeing the light of day, she had been singing in her head all night. She thought everyone could hear in her head, so she thought she was bothering everyone with her songs and that did not matter to her. The hospital frightened him. The first night she had spent there, a woman had come to shake her in bed and wish her the grace of God. She did not feel safe at all. She felt lonely and isolated. She was afraid to die alone in this hospital. She was afraid of never seeing Albert again. When her parents saw her visit the next morning, she said to them, "Am I here because you want to get rid of me?" Speaking to his family. She was told that she was totally lost and that nothing she said was meaningful. She became aware of the diagnosis, she was mad. This means that she was somehow disconnected from reality. All his perceptions were troubled. At times, she thought that if she was in the hospital, it was because she had a life-threatening illness and they did not want to tell her what she was suffering from. She saw symbols, made links from one idea to another, and heard double messages day after day. The double messages were in a regular conversation that implied another message. It's as if two paths were outlined. That of darkness, with the messages under silence, which seemed to impose itself more, and that of light, the way she had chosen, was what was said and not implied. It was difficult because she chose the path of life, while that of death seemed to prevail. During his madness, preponderant elements resurfaced. The fear of death, of deadly diseases, the meaning of symbols such as colors and figures, the idea that ideas could be implanted in one's head and then read in one's thoughts. A host of unfounded ideas swarmed in his head. The fear of death came from the fact that she thought we were going after her life. She felt terribly devalued, as she had no value and we want her to disappear from this planet. She did not want to die, and by analyzing things, even from the point of view of her madness, she said nobody is perfect, why she should die while others have the right to live. This perspective helped him to revalue and decide to make his place in this world. She must have learned to trust herself and see her qualities and strengths. One thing was certain, the strength to live was very strong in her. She was obsessed with fear of having a life-threatening illness. She thought she had an illness and they did not want to tell him. She was very scared. Rosalind had associated colors with people. Red represented her, while blue and black were associated with her lover. Green represented hope. She was constantly looking for that color. This represented for her the chances of getting out of it. If there was green, it increased his confidence in life and healing. Fortunately, there is green everywhere, especially summer. Over time, she had discovered that hope did not reside in colors, but deep down. When we have faith in the future, it's as if we had less burden on our shoulders. We trust in life and we know that everything will work out for the best. Even when everything seems hopeless, hope is a force that will support us. We must always keep hope because there is always hope. The numbers took an important dimension in his madness. She had associated the figures with the meanings they took in the Tarot of Marseilles. She saw numbers everywhere with very specific meanings. Each person around him had his number, linked to a character in the tarot. 13 represented death in the tarot. She was a little afraid of this premium figure on board, but by analyzing more, we learn that death represents a change of plan and it can be very positive. She had stopped being afraid of death and seeing this symbol as a sign of positive change. The belief that people could read in his head had grown. She thought everyone could hear her thoughts. In her madness, she lived a permanent nightmare that haunted her. His ideas were going at breakneck speed. A host of baseless and meaningless stories swirled in his head. At the asylum, he was given permission to write. She wrote a lot. She wrote her states of mind, which was summed up in her despair at life. She had suicidal thoughts, but she did not want to die, she just wanted to make sense of her life. She had been left alone in an institution for the insane, alone and sad. The institutions were very contemptuous of people with so-called madness. She was infantilized and treated as incompetent. Always isolated in an institution, she ardently sought a meaning for her life, but she remained in nothingness. She was alone and suicidal, but no one seemed to care. Rosalind had been living for a year in this asylum. She was isolated from the outside world. Only his parents came to visit him occasionally. Albert was not aware of Rosalind's precarious state of health. He often wrote to her, addressing the mail to his parents, but strangely he received no reply. Rosalind's parents scrupulously preserved all the letters Albert sent him, without ever looking at the contents. They thought it was personal to her, but on the other hand, they did not want to give those letters back to Rosalind, because they did not want her to harbor a lost hope. They were ashamed of their daughter's condition and did not want Albert to hear the news. Instead, after a month of being interned, Albert was announced to have died in the war. We wanted her to forget about it as soon as possible and to move on. In any case, the doctors had suggested that Rosalind would never leave the asylum because of her mental state. It was better for her to give up false hope outside these walls. However, Rosalind never lost hope that she would see the light of day again. During the year that Albert's fellowship lasted, he had taught her to fight for what she wanted in life and to always have hope. She had said to herself, one day, it will be nothing but a bad memory. She was going out one day. In 1918, the war finally ended. Albert was back. A bouquet of flowers in his hand, he had knocked on the door of the family's home in Rosalind. His mother opened the ravaged air. She invited Albert to sit in the kitchen and served him tea. She must have informed him of Rosalind's condition, that she had been in the asylum since her hasty departure for the war. For Rosalind, it was a terrible emotional shock to lose another person dear to her heart. She lived too much intense emotions, not to mention the melancholy that had accompanied her throughout her life. She had lost contact with reality after all these events. It was already dark. Albert had not lost a moment longer, and he had gone to the asylum. He had stuck his nose to a closed door and nobody had deigned to open it. On the threshold of the door, he sat down. He was going to wait until the next morning, that he would let him in. As soon as the opportunity arose to enter the institution, he asked to see Rosalind. At first, they did not want to grant him access, but when he had stipulated that he was his fiancée, he had been granted the meeting. Sitting on her bed, looking out the window looking lost, Rosalind was only a shadow of herself. He took a moment to look at it and tears ran down his cheeks. Why life could sometimes be so cruel. The woman of her life, once in love and full of hope for the future, had died. Being careful not to frighten him, he approached her and took her hand. She had burst into tears at once. She thought he was dead, and now he was there, more handsome and charming than ever, by his side. She had told him that for her, he was still living in his heart. She had never forgotten it. In her head, she hummed in a loop their love song. He had to leave the institution, but he had promised him that he would come back, and that was what he had done. She began to have great self-confidence. For her, he was the only one she could trust. He was everything for her. She begged him to bring her out of this hellish place. One evening he came to visit him. He asked to see the doctor. In general, the doctors do not give a meeting in the evening, but Albert was very determined to get Rosalind out of there, had managed to have a consultation. He managed to convince the doctor to let her out. The doctor had explained to Albert the heavy burden in which he was investing himself. He would be responsible for Rosalind. On a cold night in August, Rosalind came out of the asylum with her fiancé. She had never been so happy. She was very proud of him and she would never thank him enough. She would never have enough gratitude to him for all that he had done for her. Albert did not know what to expect with his sick half, but he took the risk of believing in her. He had taken it under his wing and he had decided to guide his steps until he was cured. Her parents did not agree with Albert's idea of getting her out of the hospital. He would prefer that she stay there. For them, she was safer there. All the same, they agreed to host Rosalind again for a month, while Albert found a place to stay and officially unite through marriage before moving in together. They had to go into the open quickly enough to live under the same roof. From then on, Albert would also be better able to help Rosalind heal. Albert had not listened to the medical staff. He had brought Rosalind out of the institute after more than a year of internment. The hospital staff objected to his release, but Albert did not let himself be impressed and got his way. Rosalind's memories were vague about the state in which she was at the asylum, but her lover had told her that she was totally lost, not to mention that she looked miserable. She begged him to get her out of there, that it was not his place, which he had done. Their wedding. Albert had asked him to marry him shortly before he left for the war. They had made a promise to love each other for life. It was the month of August and they wanted to go quickly to Light. Albert had asked him to set a date for their wedding. She had therefore fixed the date of the marriage on September 21, 1918. It was the autumnal equinox. They found the perfect date for the occasion. Moreover, for her who was still affected by madness, she pointed to the following allusion. The number 21 in the Marseilles tarot represented the world. On the map we see a beautiful woman, surrounded by 4 elements. This card means great success, glory. For Rosalind this represented a sign for a positive and happy future. Their marriage would be celebrated on that date. They had come to Light. Albert had awakened. He had a wonderful dream. He saw them, married, coming out of a carriage in a veil of glittering smoke or bursting with 1,000 sparks. They were going towards a train. She was very eager to see Albert and finally live with him. Albert had re-elected to a room in the hotel of Rosalind's father. Although the residence of her future wife's parents was adjacent to the hotel, they kept separate until their union was celebrated. In the company of his mother, Rosalind was preparing for the big moment. Rosalind was not at all cured of her madness, but she still had enough lucidity. She was very conscious that she was going to live with Albert and that she should behave like a perfect wife. His mother was silent before his daughter. She was happy for her, that her fate was different than a life spent in the asylum, but she remained worried. She knew the mental fragility of her daughter and she feared for her. However, she was hopeful that with the return of the man from his heart, the bad days are behind. His mother now regretted having kept the mail that Albert had sent him and made her daughter believe when her suitor died. This decision had been suggested by the doctors, supposedly his good. His mother was doing Rosalind's hair, and she was sad and regretful. She had headed for a chest she had opened. In this chest were all Albert's letters. She had handed them to Rosalind, apologizing for taking a bad decision. Rosalind was moved and pressed the letters against her heart. She had slipped her fingers on Albert's handwriting and a smile had come to light up his face. She was confident in the future. The result of the hairstyle was wonderful, though at first she was not sure. She was afraid of not pleasing her future husband. Without losing a moment, she went to put on her dress, with the help of her mother. It was a long white robe adorned with little pink flowers. She was fitted to the body, sporting small brilliants in the center and was laced in the back. She was so eager to see her future husband, but she feared she would not like him. He had not seen her dress before the wedding and she hoped he would find her pretty. She had worn the jewels she had borrowed from her mother, which were sparkling. She wore a necklace and matching earrings. Her mother had knotted on her left wrist a bracelet of flowers and white feathers, which she had made herself. Albert had also put on his best clothes. It was black pants and jacket with a white shirt. He also wore a bow tie. His pants were held up by large straps. His shoes were shiny black. A chain adorned his pants. A beautiful hat was spanking him. He also wore white gloves, a cane, cufflinks, and pretty shirt buttons. Although Rosalind did not see her on their wedding day, she knew he would be breathtakingly elegant. The ceremony was to take place at 2 o'clock, but they were late. Everything was not up to date. When everything was ready, she took her father's arm and went to the one who made her beat her heart. She knew that Albert was waiting for him. She was so nervous. She was eager to see him, but also to take him in his arms and kiss him. She was advancing beside her father with a quick step towards her future husband. He stood there, looking at her. They were both very moved. He restrains himself not to cry. Moved, he tried to restrain his tears, which flowed all the same on his face. His mother-in-law then approached him to reassure him. Rosalind was advancing towards her future husband, happy. He had sent her a kiss to reassure her as she walked towards him, for although she was the happiest woman in the world, she was worried. He had reassured him and everything was fine. As she walked towards him, she was looking straight at him without looking away from him. His father while his hand to his future husband. Hand in hand, they were happy. They read the articles of the law. Then Rosalind had read his wishes to Albert. She was floating on a cloud. She was intoxicated with happiness and she was eager to read her wishes. She had written them with heart and love for him. His feelings for Albert were deep, intense. She felt a great love for Albert and a great passion. He inspired her. She could not imagine living without him. He had shown her the path of light. In turn, he had read to him his wishes, which were very touching. She felt all her love in her words. They said then, "Yes, I want it," and exchanged their wedding rings. They had been declared husband and wife. From now on, united for life, they felt great happiness and incomparable fullness. They returned to the home of Rosalind's parents for a small reception. In fact, there were only them and Rosalind's parents. She was an only child, while Albert had long since cut off all the family ties he had. That's why they were so few at this wedding. Rosalind's father had organized a small ceremony in their home to complete the wedding day. It was the rose ceremony. He handed Rose a rose, as well as Albert. He had read a really wonderful text that said they had to exchange the roses as their first gift, as a husband and wife, and then find a place in their home where they would drop them, and whenever a misunderstanding arises, they would place a rose at that place as a sign of reconciliation. They had therefore exchanged their roses tenderly. They had enjoyed this ceremony very much. Throughout the ceremony, Albert struggled to restrain his tears and all his emotions. He was happy and even exclaimed, "We got it." She had thought she had never been so happy as that day. This day was special, she felt floating on a cloud. She was stressed, especially before the ceremony, but when he had sent her a kiss as she walked towards him, all her fears had fallen. She really enjoyed the moment with the greatest happiness. It was a memorable day, a fairy tale that her husband wanted to live with her. It was a landmark event in their lives, which they wanted to share. The day of their wedding was a rainy day, but had no cloud on the beauty of the whole day. It was an unforgettable day that they would keep engraved in their memories for the rest of their lives. Love is such an intense feeling, it's a real gift from heaven. For eternity, they would be united. For their wedding, Albert had promised to offer him a wooden chest to put his dress and all the accessories of the wedding. He had therefore offered him this present, made with his hands. This one had been done with love, by her husband, in order to preserve their wedding memories. Since leaving the asylum, she had stayed with her parents while waiting for the wedding day. Her mind was still very disturbed, but with the arrival of events as pleasing as Albert's return, her exit from the asylum and their marriage, she was already a little better. Rosalind had not yet seen her future home. Albert had not slipped words, to reserve a surprise for him on their wedding day. After the evening in honor of their union had ended, he had taken Rosalind to his new home. Night had already fallen and she could barely see the house in the distance. At the end of a long path lined with gigantic trees was a small wooden house. It was in the countryside and she felt a little disoriented. She had lived all her life in the city, in the metropolis. She had only rarely to taste the joys of the open air, having grown up and lived in the city. Albert, he came from the lower river. He used large spaces. He had left his home region because of a major conflict with his father. He had wandered all over the province looking for work and good times with women for a decade. When he first met Rosalind, he did not think he would make him his wife. She was a woman like any other with whom he could satisfy some carnal pleasures. However, Rosalind was very reserved and was not very inclined to such misbehavior. In general, Albert's presence was enough to attract women to him, but with Rosalind it was different. He must have courted her for a long time before she showed interest. This approached him more, and that is why he had courted her gallantly for a year before asking him to marry her. Albert wanted to uproot Rosalind from his imaginary world and his sad thoughts. He wanted to show him the beautiful side of life. That's why he had found this little country house. Behind the house was a river. An old bark canoe had been abandoned. There was a large farmland and also wooded. In the past, when Albert had a fixed home, he lived on growing his vegetables. The place was ideal for a huge garden. He wanted to go back to the land and make this wonderful world discover his wife. Rosalind discovered the places with enchantment. The house was warm and welcoming. 2 cats came to meet him, purring and asking for hugs. She felt good in her home, but what she most wanted was to be in Albert's arms. They had never had sex before living together. The first time was very special. He was already under the covers as she entered the room to join him. She had undressed in front of him with shyness. Then she had joined him under the duvet, or they had savored the pleasure of finally finding themselves in their intimacy after all the time that the desire had been felt on both sides. He wanted her to be comfortable in their home, where she could heal. She was surrounded by a peaceful environment, cats, and of course the most important of all, her lover. He had offered her everything she needed to heal. Love, love, and love. Albert did not have an instruction manual to help Rosalind heal, but he had worked from the bottom of his heart. It was the most beautiful thing anyone had done for her. In her environment, in safety, she could put order in her ideas. With the help of his lover, they separated the reality of fiction. He was always there for her. It was without a doubt his guardian angel. He had brought it into the comfort of their home. She continued to believe that she had a life-threatening illness and that she had almost no time left to live. He had been patient and he always reassured her. He had explained to her that just like Don Quixote and Sancho, she was fighting against windmills. None of his fears were true. To evacuate his frustration, he had invited him into the woods to bang on trees with branches shouting. It had been liberating for her. He always had good ideas to help him through this crisis. The story of his lover's windmills had helped him a lot. He had told her that she was fighting against things that did not exist. She just had to stop worrying. During difficult events he had been there for her. Nothing forced him to do what he did for her, but he did. Rosalind was very grateful. She was proud to be his wife and to be at his side. To share his life with a man as he filled his heart with happiness. She no longer believed that she had the right to love. She had seen someone in her and was interested in her even when she was not at his best. Albert remained with Rosalind during the difficult events. He had listened to him tell his stories that made no sense and offered him his support. She believed that everyone, including her husband, could read his thoughts. With her husband, it still had some positive effects. Believing that he heard everything that was going on in his mind, she had no fear of entrusting him with everything she thought, since according to her he already knew what she was going to tell. She always told him the truth about what she was going through. This had the effect of creating a great bond of trust between them. He had told her one day, "If our love goes through this storm, nothing and nobody can come to destroy it." They were always very united and even more lovers. Nobody had ever done the same for her. In turn she wanted to be there for him. He suffered from abdominal pain. She worried about him. She did not like to see him suffer and she hoped he was not serious. Sometimes when he talked about it, it did not bode well. Happiness had smiled on them. Life had made that their road had crossed. They were so good, she had only one wish, is that life saves them from the evil eye and gives them many more years of happiness. She wanted to remain optimistic and that everything would eventually work out for the best. She had told him, "I am with you in health as illness, wealth as poverty and life to death." With him she felt so good. Especially when they shared intimate moments. She was all his and hers to her. Nothing could come to disturb the tranquility that reigned between them in these privileged moments. They had opened to each other to confide. He knew her life by heart and she started to know his life too. They had so much to tell each other. He was not only her husband, Albert was also his best friend, his confidant. He felt the same way on his side. They had great openness to one another and acceptance without judgment. She presumed that the love that united them must be great to be so complicit. Life at his side filled his heart with happiness. It was so exhilarating. For the first time in her life she felt alive, she breathed. Every moment in his presence was a gift from heaven. He was an extraordinary man. He was a little crazy sometimes, but she could not imagine it any other way and love someone other than him. He was so special. He stood out for his way of being, thinking, and acting. He was without contradiction his soul mate. They were on the same frequency, the same wavelength. The moments spent with Albert were the most beautiful that life had offered to Rosalind. Every moment was unique and special. Her presence was for her the most precious. They had gone for a canoe trip. It was a beautiful Sunday in July and it was hot. In a small bay, they had docked and dismounted. It was very fun and they had a lot of fun. In the evening when it was time to go to bed, they always talked a little about the pillow. Sometimes she huddled against him. It was a moment of pure pleasure. Otherwise, she took it by the hand and they fell asleep. A sweet kiss before falling asleep was very important to her. The love they shared was the most wonderful of all. They had a trust in each other unshakable. He had a strong character, as much as his, but that did not stop them from being very in love with each other. Their characters clashed, but always with respect. They enjoyed the pleasures that life offered them. They had a blast watching their vegetables grow. Almost every day, they went to visit the garden and they were still amazed by its beauty. When she met Albert, a lot of things had changed, but at first she kept a bit of a pain in her soul. Although already much happier than in the past, he remained in her heart a negative state of mind. Albert had accompanied him during his madness. He had never let him down. She had gained a lot of confidence in him. He had become his lighthouse in the night. He guided his steps through the chaos that reigned in his head. She was very afraid of dying. She was hooked on life with all her might, and Albert, of course. It was there that she had begun to really enjoy the happiness of living. Happiness was in a piece of furniture they had just built, a caress, and a sweet word. All the little things in their daily life became a pretext to be happy. After having recovered all her wits, that is to say once cured of her madness, she had kept this same enthusiasm to live. Life was not as it was in the past. Their life as a couple was not always a long calm river. They sometimes tackled problems and conflicts. They had faced both winds and tide. Life was not always easy, but they had chosen to cross together for better or for worse. They loved each other despite everything they had experienced. They knew how to talk to each other and understand each other. They knew how to accept each other with their ups and downs. She was far from perfection, she had her weaknesses. Although she had learned to trust herself more, she still lacked self-confidence. On a beautiful summer day, they had put the boat in the water and had gone upstream of the river. They went to a small lake. The water was limpid blue and the lake was bordered by a beautiful forest where they could see wading geese and ducks. They went there occasionally to bathe and share intimate moments. In their simplest element, they savored the contact of water on their skin. The water was good and the time they spent there too. It was Albert who had introduced this little paradise to Rosalind. Nature had given them 4 adorable, very vigorous kittens. One of them, Orion, died 4 days after he was born. They had dedicated a rock on a mountain in his memory. On occasion, they would gather on the mountain thinking about him. His presence, though brief, was forever in their hearts. He had moved them and he had come to get their tears. Rosalind and Albert shared the pain of having lost this little being. Albert passed on to Rosalind all that life had taught him. Have self-confidence, know how to find solutions to problems. He always said, there are no problems but solutions. He had passed on his passion for living and enjoying the moment. He had great wisdom in his way of being and thinking. She had a lot of admiration for Albert. His life would have had no meaning in his presence. He was the person she admired and respected most on this earth. They considered each day as unique. They savored each day with intensity and serenity. Tomorrow would be another day, which they did not worry about. Daily. A typical day began at Rosalind and Albert to offer the cat meal. Nature's doing its work, some adorable kittens were born and expand their families. They now had 11 cats. Albert had always been a cat lover. He loved them, talked to them and he gave them back. The presence of the cats was their happiness. They were small rays of sun that brought joy into their hearts. Cooking was also an undeniable joy for Rosalind and Albert. With the addition of herbs and vegetables from their garden, they worked wonders. They were passionate about the vegetable garden. The freshness of the vegetables he produced made them particularly happy. Albert was a man for whom the love of life and the living was an integral part of him. He appreciated every little shoots that had made their way to the light. Albert possessed a great talent for manual work. One of his passions was undoubtedly wood. Since his youth, he worked it. He had made many furniture. Their home was almost entirely furnished with furniture made by Albert. It gave off a very warm atmosphere. Albert had put his personal touch on each of them, which made them valuable. There was a sense of comfort at home. Wherever one laid one's eyes, one could see the gentleness and tenderness they had put in it. The retrospective. Looking back over the last few years, Rosalind saw how much everything that had happened had profoundly transformed him. She was always depressed, sad and in a bad mood was overflowing with life today. She was in love and happy. She cried almost every day, had dried her tears. She who believed that she would never know love, she lived it intensely every day. Then, looking further, she had realized everything she had accomplished during her life. Before the prospect of death, an idea that haunted her during her madness, she wondered if she had accomplished something in her life. The answer was yes. She had met the love of her life. She was having intense moments with her husband, whom she had never even dreamed of. She had a little house with Albert, who breathed the love they had there. She had learned to live from day to day and to be happy with what she had in life. She who had wished all her life to feel peace and serenity, she lived it now every day. She was grateful for all the abundance life offered her and the happiness of living with the man she loved at every moment. 30 years later, Rosalind and Albert lived happy days. 30 years had passed, that they were still in love and in love with each other. The house they lived in had aged with them. She was not as radiant as at a young age, but she had a stamp and a soul. They had always had the passion of cats. During those many years, some had been born and others had left for another world. One of their cats had shared 24 years at their side. It was a special cat. She followed Albert everywhere, when he went for a walk in the woods, for example. More than once, he had to climb trees to help him down. After 24 years with them, she left them for her last rest. It was with sadness that she had left this land, Rosalind and Albert, and her other friends the cats. They were particularly stressed during the loss of their cat. As usual, Rosalind and Albert had gone for their daily walk in the woods near their home. At the foot of a willow, they loved to sit and watch the peaceful river. Albert was dozing for a moment. Rosalind had therefore decided to close her eyes a few moments. She could only hear the sound of leaves wrinkled by the wind and the slow-flowing river. The atmosphere was so peaceful that she fell asleep. When she awoke, she had turned her head tenderly towards Albert. She had kissed his lips so that he would wake up because he was still asleep. He had not had a shudder on his skin. Tears had fallen on Rosalind's cheeks. She had taken her husband's hand and stuck it to his heart. She had said to him then, "My love, you will always live in my heart." At this point in her life, she was alone again. Her husband was gone. However, in her heart she felt alive and ready for her. Albert had taught her everything she needed to know about life, but also about death. He had taught her to be strong and to know how to go through the trials of life. Throughout his life, he had somehow prepared for the eventuality of this scenario. She should face it with courage and not be distressed by the pain of events. She had closed her eyes again and had fallen asleep shaking her husband's hand against his chest. Under the stars, she had spent the night with him. Albert did not want a grand ceremony for the great departure. He wanted something solemn and intimate. He would find eternal peace at the foot of this willow, the place of their last moments shared side by side. Rosalind had recited Our Father and slipped a note on the stone that covered Albert's body. It was the word she had written for him while she was locked in the asylum. She had kept it all these years. They used to grow sage in their garden. Rosalind had burned it for Albert, purifying his way to heaven and warding off evil spirits. It was a ritual that Albert had taught him. Facing herself, Rosalind had to react. She had to fight to continue living, even in the absence of her loving husband. He had taught her how to be fast and not let down. She must now continue her way, without Albert's hand in the hollow of his own. Instead, she would bear the memory of an incomparable man in her heart. They were soulmates, her soul would continue to live in her. The departure of Albert created in Rosalind the need to put in writing all his teachings. He had made her discover a meaning to her life, a meaning to life. She wanted to write the knowledge of her husband. Her goal was to build a collection, which would be the guardian of their memory, the guardian of her knowledge. The meaning of life. Rosalind had plunged deep into her memories and life experiences to write an essay on the meaning of life. At the heart of Rosalind's world was revealed his vision of life, according to Albert's teachings. Be happy. Life can be complex or very simple depending on how you approach it. Rosalind believed that the meaning of life rested on the ability to live the present moment. To know how to appreciate what we have. What about just being happy? If the meaning of life was just not to be good with oneself, to be happy. It's about being happy with what you have. The daily is full of excuses to be happy. A sweet word from his lover or the passion of living with cat. For her, it was also the joy of cultivating her garden, of canoeing, of cooking with herbs. Joy is everywhere, it is in us. She was ardently looking for meaning in her life until she understood. Love and be happy. She believed it was the key to finding meaning in her life. To love life, to love one's love, to love oneself. Enjoy all the beauty of life. A sunrise or sunset, a landscape, falling rain, or snowflakes. The beauty of life is all around us. Just appreciate it. She had gone through hardships, she had to make choices, make decisions about life. She had chosen to live and enjoy it fully. She feared life no more than death. She was happy. She believed that fearing death was like being afraid of life. Afraid to live the present moment. Life does not reserve us only moments filled with good surprises. It has a lot of difficulties. Everything is in the attitude of how one approaches the situations. If we accept life as it is, we are always happy. To stand against the obstacles of life is absolutely nothing except being unhappy. Happiness lies in the unconditional acceptance of the events of life. Much of her life she was afraid to die. She was afraid to leave without meeting the love of her life. She was afraid of dying without having known happiness. Finally, if we can say what she did best, it was to be happy every moment. The rest became less important. Death can be scary a priori. It evokes the end of everything around us. We leave life and those we love to begin a last journey to the unknown. It's physical death. However, there is another way to see death. We can simply die to our existence for a new life. We leave a way of living or thinking to discover a new one. In her case, she was very afraid of dying with the feeling of having accomplished nothing of her life, unhappy and sad. She had the impression of having realized nothing, of not having known love and happiness. What was wonderful was that through her period of madness she had learned to face her fear of death. She was confronted all day long. She had said, she was going to get over it. Whenever the fear of dying won her, she would say to herself, right. Go away, afraid of death. Then she had learned to bite into life and savor every moment. She had the good fortune to meet love. From now on, she no longer feared death. She knew that when her time came, she would have benefited from life. She would have done a lot of nice things every day. The love she shared with her lover was part of that daily life she savored every day. She had accomplished a lot. Love and be loved, be happy simply. Life is beautiful, in all its complexity and simplicity. She had also had the chance to meet a wonderful man who had changed his life. It was thanks to him that his vision of life had evolved. Without the great philosophy of life that he had transmitted to her, she would not have been where she was today. He had taught her to enjoy life, to enjoy every moment, to be good with herself. He had given her confidence. It was true that she had made part of the way alone, but it was he who had opened the way for her. He was a remarkable man. She had made peace with life and death. She no longer feared death any more than she feared life. She was happy here and now, right now. She savored each day with passion, pleasure, and tranquility. Happiness is everywhere, it is in us. The joy of seeing their cats doing their madness rejoiced her. The pleasure of cooking and savoring a good meal, especially if it was with the vegetables from their garden. All is an excuse to be happy. She was so happy that she felt like she realized everything. She had been in love with a wonderful man for 30 years. He knew how to give meaning to his life. She believed that great love was the biggest dream of her life. Life always surprises us. The infinite expanse of unsuspected events that may occur often exceeds the limit that our mind can perceive. That is to say, we have a very often mistaken vision of the future because we simply do not know anything about it. So why worry about tomorrow? Living in the present moment is easier than one might think. It suffices to make the often apocalyptic scenarios of our minds, to make room for peace. Life has its joys and miseries, but we can remain happy even when our road seems to be sprinkled with pebbles. You have to know how to make jewels. The trials of life are opportunities to evolve. She had been confronted with difficult ordeals, her confinement due to a period of madness in her life. With both knees on the floor, she had to get up. She had the choice to let down by the events or to roll up the sleeves and go for it. She had chosen to go for it. She had learned a lot about the meaning of life during her loss of contact with reality, because she had to strive to find reason. She had to confront the existential questions of life. Good, bad. She had to position herself as a human being in the face of her being. Am I a good person? Her madness always sent her back to negative thoughts. She had to drive them out of her mind and take her place as a woman on this earth. In her case, her crisis of madness proved to be the most profitable test she had had the opportunity to live. It had allowed him to find meaning in his life. She had the choice to let herself sink into melancholy or cling to life, which she had done. She had the false belief that she was going to die. In the face of this disturbing prospect at that time, she had to resist with all her strength the thoughts that dragged her to nothingness. She had clung to life with all her strength. The unconditional support of her husband was undoubtedly the source from which she drew her strength to get by. Her presence was for her redemption. He knew how to listen to her, understand her, guide her, advise her. He had offered him his philosophy of life. Her tender husband possessed a vision of life that she had never met with in her life. At home, it was natural to live in the present. When an obstacle arose, he always said, simply, "We will cross the bridge when we reach the river." No place for doubt or worry. He knew how to make a good management of the events of life, by not giving them more importance than necessary. He knew how to enjoy every moment. With him everything was an opportunity to enjoy fullness and happiness. There is no miracle recipe to be happy. One creates one's own happiness as one can create one's own suffering. So, while creating, as well build a life of happiness. Before the arrival of her lover, she contemplated the beauties of life, but without savoring them fully. She could sit in front of a beautiful landscape and from a rational point of view she contemplated it and saw its beauty, but she could not manage to capture all the essence. Thanks to the hardships she had had to overcome and the sharing of the love of her life with her husband, she had managed to be imbued with all the beauties available to them. Take the time to rave about the purity of a flower. Marvel at the first buds of spring. Invest in everything you do intensively. For example, cook with love cookies. Offer a foot bath to your sweetheart. Formerly, if she had been asked if she would have changed her life for another, she would have answered yes. She found her life miserable. She was constantly unhappy. Aged in her 60s, she would answer the same question: if her life were to be revived, she would take the same path to where she was now. If she had to walk on pebbles part of her life to discover a peaceful road, and well, it was worth it. Maybe if she had not gone through all these ways she would not have known happiness. Perhaps she would never have met the man of her life. Strangely, when events such as Rosalind's alienation occur, this has the effect of driving individuals away from a couple, not knowing how to cope with the situation. For them it was the opposite. This obstacle brought them together and united deeply. They had talked openly about themselves and their experiences. Without embarrassment they had confided to each other what had the effect of bringing them together and share a unique relationship based on respect and mutual understanding. She believed that the secret to being happy in love was authenticity. Be true. Do not hide anything, say everything openly. A relationship based on communication and openness. We must not confine ourselves to our vision of things. We must open ourselves to others and welcome them with their strengths and weaknesses. We must not be afraid to express what we feel, even if we do not always have a favorable reception at first sight. We must allow time to do its work and the acceptance of the other will come. You must love without restraint, without fear of being hurt. To live in the fear of suffering and not to love one's true love does not offer the fullness that a pure-hearted heart can offer. Great love can fascinate or frighten. When one indulges in deep feelings of love, one may be afraid of being hurt by the being of our heart. However, living with such restraint does not make room for happiness. We live in fear. To be happy in love, she believed that the best solution was to drop into the void, in the sense of figuring and enjoy the feeling of ecstasy that it provides. You must not be afraid to love. Too often we can fear love for fear of suffering, so we do not like it 100%. Dare to take the step towards great love is not without risk. One can suffer to the height of happiness that one has known. Who says great joys, the sentences will surely be equivalent. Why not risk everything for the whole thing? To love more than one would ever have dared to imagine and to be happy at the moment, even knowing the pains that are a natural part of life. For her, she had shared a love to the excesses of what she never thought possible. Sometimes misunderstandings between her husband and her, and it was sometimes difficult to overcome. Nevertheless, she believed that when a love rests on solid bases, one comes out of his discord, grows up and even more in love. What is the concern for? If only to tell fears that in the majority of cases will never happen. So, why worry? We are in control of our destiny, but sometimes happen impromptu situations, which we must of course face. Apprehending situations only reinforces a feeling of fear. So we live in fear that situations arise, while he will never know. In addition, worrying about a problem that has just occurred, will not help the resolution of the latter. It is a waste of unnecessary energy and makes life miserable. Everyone is looking for meaning in their lives. If the meaning of life was simply to be happy, taste the happiness of living. Not a mere ephemeral happiness, the duration that presents the coveted object. A lasting happiness that will be fully savored. If we began by learning to be happy, it is the whole life that would be transformed. It would become a source of well-being. If we had a hard time, we could be objective and take the situation philosophically. The tests are not there to ruin happiness, they are there to give us the opportunity to evolve. We can be happy, be good with ourselves in all circumstances. It is sometimes normal to feel pain, sorrow, anger, a moment of despair. However, if one has found the key to happiness, these feelings will only be shadows of passage. After the rain comes the good weather. You have to have confidence in yourself and in life. This does not mean to wait passively for things to happen alone. Situations need to be triggered if change is desired. Life will always surprise us and we must be surprised. Casual, funny, unexpected, sometimes even terrifying events come together every day, and that's the beauty of life. If everything were planned in advance, there would be no room for spontaneity, the impromptu. What would life be like if we knew the hour of our death? Would we fall into exaggeration or an amorphous state before life? She believed that when you take life on the right side simply, there is nothing more to our test. Every challenge on our road becomes a challenge, one that can be proud of oneself after overcoming the hurdle. Her husband was a remarkable man. In the depths of him rested great wisdom in the face of life. He knew how to appreciate it, enjoy it, and savor it every moment. By his calmness and serene attitude towards life, he had transmitted his knowledge to him. To order, he had brought her back regularly, while she panicked for different situations. Simple but reassuring words. Moreover, his serene attitude towards the events of life, he had taught him to act in the same way. His unshakable confidence in him was contagious. She had learned to trust herself more. He was a generous man who offered help and support to the people around him. As she sank into her episode of madness, he had been there for her. She had to be reassured at all times, and he was always there to listen and offer her comforting words. Trust. Between them was a great confidence. They told each other everything. Trust is the foundation of a couple's success. Without trust, we build sand castles. While she was in her period of madness, he said, "I am honest and frank." She had always trusted his words. Even in the darkest moments when she no longer knew who to trust, he had won hers. She had always believed in him. But he too had believed in her. He trusted that she would get by. Trust is the cement of the couple. To learn to trust, you just have to surrender. Letting go of our doubts and our fears. Listen to the other and take his words into consideration and not to doubt them. It is having an unshakable faith in the other. Negative feelings of doubt must not be maintained. To trust is also to accept being vulnerable to the other. This is to understand that we are likely to experience disappointments if our confidence is shaken. Be that as it may, sharing trust in a couple is a step towards the success of a relationship where harmony and happiness reign. Trust in life can also be called hope. Hope comes down to having faith. Rosalind had lived through years of darkness where she could not catch a glimpse that one day she would be happy. However, she had always hoped that one day she would experience fullness. Even in the moments when the balance sheet of her life was negative, she had faith that one day her life would be transformed, where she would discover the feeling of happiness. It is true that sometimes despair seized her. Only she had always kept in mind that she would enjoy the joy of living. The strangest thing is that when there seemed to be no glimmer of hope, she finally discovered well-being. She was on an episode of madness and her mind was very disturbing. The burden was heavy to bear. Every moment she feared death and a multitude of unfounded ideas. She had to find the strength to fight and deal with her worries. She had hoped that she would succeed. She had never given up on the idea that she would make it and would lead a normal life again. She had been right to believe it, to trust that time would help her get things right. Albert had helped him to have a free spirit. She had lived a wonderful life with her lover, with whom she had boundless complicity. She had a beautiful family of cats that were full of life. She had the pleasure of having a garden with colors and exquisite flavors. They had shared their lives in an environment of harmony, respect, and unparalleled communication. They loved to take the time to talk to each other. It could last for hours. They tackled daily topics, but also philosophical questions. They exchanged on their relationship. The love, the confidence they were in, their plans for gardening, their future canoe ballads. Chatting with her lover was a perpetual pleasure. They gave themselves days and evenings dedicated to the discussion. These privileged moments took place in an atmosphere with the sweetest feelings. Compliments poured in from both sides and they were in a state of well-being. Love. Love is in the deepest of oneself. What is wonderful is that it can be shared. It's a feeling so strong that it could move mountains. When we love, we feel like wearing a cloud. Love gives wings and it's true. Even if everything seems to go wrong in our life, love is there to give us strength and courage. Here she does not just talk about loving a person, but about loving life. Life is a gift from heaven. We must appreciate and savor every moment of life. To share one's love with the chosen one of one's heart is also a wonderful chance that one must know how to value one's true worth. When someone offers us his love, the most wonderful thing is that he is shared. When two people love each other deeply, their hearts, bodies and minds are lifted by an immeasurable force. Nothing and nobody can come and destroy it. We must be aware of how lucky we are to share our life with our soulmate. Life is beautiful, everything is a pretext for marveling in front of her. Love is a tender look, a caress on the shoulder, a smile. It is when the other makes a gesture in our attention. With her lover, Rosalind had discovered love. She did not believe that one could find the love of one's life more than once. She believed that when we met her we know and that's for life. She believed there is a different degree to love. One can love many people in one's life without ever having known supreme love. The one who transcends, the one who makes the impossible possible, the one who transforms our life forever. This love is unique, it is wonderful, and it is sublime. Happiness. Happiness is lived every day, day after day. It is made of small moments of life that we savor one by one. Each gesture can be a source of happiness. In his life, happiness was a good dinner to spend with his lover. The pleasure they shared when visiting their garden. The pleasure of sailing with their canoe and basking in the sun. Everything around them was a source of life and joy in their hearts. One must always love life, even if sometimes instead of being a road paved with gold, it is strewn with pebbles. Pebbles are beautiful, they can teach us things. In fact, it is because of the trials of life that we can learn to get to know each other and to know others. Happiness is not necessarily in the realization of a major project. He resides deep within himself. We are happy when we are able to appreciate the present moment and all that surrounds us. A bird on a branch can be the source of instant happiness and leave us smiling for the day. To be happy, it's not complicated. You have to be able to look around everything around you and be amazed. There is nothing insurmountable, everything resides in the strength that is in us. It is not enough to wait for happiness to knock on our door, for an extraordinary news to make us happy. This kind of happiness is ephemeral. We have a sudden joy and then nothing. We fall back into our melancholy and our pain of living. If we take the time to appreciate what is around us at every moment, to recognize its value, beauty, happiness will be in our heart. Conclusion. The story of Rosalind and Albert is the story of two particular lives that united their destiny in love, but also in all the suffering that life can bring. They had been through the trials and had weathered the storms. After facing all the miseries, life had offered them the fulfillment of their dearest dreams. With their unshakable confidence in life, they knew it would bring them sweeter days. They had to face terrible trials. They had always savored the present moment and had no particular material expectation of life. When life decides to offer abundance, we are all the happier. We know how to value the goodness of life. The abundance that had been offered to them was an unparalleled gift they could savor. After living down, we no more appreciate the highs. Life is made of surprises, good or bad, depending on how they perceive it. Let us take care of what we can call bad surprises, because they can lead us on a road that one could never have imagined. Their roads had crossed. Two existences with unique colors had melted into a new color. This new color represented the union of two lives with instinctual past, which now shared their paths for eternity. We come to the world alone and we will leave this earth alone. On the other hand, we can share the time that has given us with the people we love. One can share the deepest of oneself with the chosen one of one's heart. Rosalind and Albert had offered each other. They had freed the obstacles which strewed their way, to create an existence where each moment became a privileged moment. We must live intensely the present moment, because every moment that is offered to us is unique and will never come back. Even the difficult moments must be lived. It is they who make us appreciate the moments of grace and where we learn. Rosalind and Albert had been able to realize a life where happiness reigned. They had discovered the meaning of life. Despite the obstacles, they remained confident and in love. Their love had crossed sea and world. A life for two forever. A phrase that crossed the time and that makes sense. Rosalind. After Albert's death, Rosalind had written his memoirs. She had spent 5 years there. Every day she got up early in the morning to feed her cats. In them lived the spirit of her husband. Albert had devoted a part of his life to his cats and he loved them deeply. Rosalind was equally attached to it. They had never started a family officially. It was very marginal for that time. They had dedicated their lives to their cats, to the pleasure of cultivating the land and the good times they shared when they were close to each other. It was winter now. It was very cold, but like every day Rosalind went under the willow, near Albert, to collect himself. The river was frozen and the snow covered the pile of rocks where Albert was. Rosalind had decided to sit down for a moment and meditate on her life with her husband. She relived good times. She had seen her life unfold before her eyes. She had relived the loss of her first husband. She had felt all the sadness she was experiencing at that time. Then there was Albert's meeting. It was for her the beginning of an adventure in a life where through innumerable obstacles she had finally felt herself living. She had relived Albert's sudden departure for the war and the great emptiness she felt then. The years she had spent at the asylum had been terrifying. Although she was out of touch with reality, she was aware of everything that was going on around her. She was aware of the danger Albert was facing in the war. Besides, he had been told that he had not survived this war. She had experienced a second mourning. Whatever her prospects were affected by her state of madness, she felt the pain of having lost the person in whom she had the most esteem, the one she loved deeply. She had relived all the pain associated with the loss of her lover. Rosalind had seen the walls of the asylum that had held him captive. She lacked air. She had felt herself stuck in her freedom, in her life. Nobody had been there to understand it, we had preferred the isolated. Like a miracle, Albert had survived the horrors of war and had come to offer him a chance to live. He had taken him under his wing and saved him from a miserable life. He had offered her the chance to heal her soul and regain her dignity. Albert had shown Rosalind the way to happiness, and that road had been traced in their footsteps side by side for 30 years before fate came to separate them again. Rosalind had a life filled with love and happiness. She thought herself lucky that life had been kind enough to offer him so much grace. Still sitting on the stone, she had suddenly felt very tired. As if the weight of all the years she had lived through misery caught up with her. Although she had known happiness, her life had not always been easy. She had to fight to taste the joy of living. Rosalind suddenly felt heaviness on her shoulders evaporate. She felt light, like a feather. His ideas had faded away and he had a phrase in his mind, a life for two forever. It was then that she had expired her last breath. Rosalind was dead, 5 years after Albert's departure. She had that day carefully stored her memories in their chest of marriage. It would be the keeper of their story for eternity. The door of the house had remained open and after a few days in the absence of Rosalind, the cats had fled. Albert and Rosalind lived in a remote corner, but there were farms nearby, where cats could find refuge. The winter storm had struck with rudeness. The wind and the snow had fallen on the frozen body of Rosalind. The snow had soon covered it. It was then that she had disappeared in silence under the pile of snow that had fallen that day. Winter had ended and had given way in the spring. The river had resumed its yard and the willow buds awoke. Rosalind's body was gone. On the stones, managed to grow small pink flowers. A hummingbird had suddenly appeared and approached the flowers. The bird had tasted the flower and left immediately. Life was returning to the place where Rosalind and Albert had lived their last hour on this earth. Every spring was reborn at this place. Summer and autumn followed. By the splendor of the landscape that was displayed at this time of the year, it would have been easy to believe that Rosalind and Albert were meeting each autumn to renew their wedding vows and their eternal love.